Thank you, attendees, for joining us. You should see a list of a slideshow right now while we're waiting for all of the attendees to join us. So while we're waiting, enjoy these scenes that occurred over the last year and a half at the Patton Homestead. Among the scenes will be a lecture series that we had at the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. There was a 75th anniversary event over 3 days for D-Day. There was a Purple Heart Trail road race. We've had a variety of military service days and military history days. That's a beautiful wedding that occurred at the property. We've had Kite Day. We've had a lot of different activities at the homestead. So enjoy this slideshow while we're waiting for all of the attendees to finish logging in. The webinar series is about to start. While we're waiting, please keep in mind that at the bottom of your screen will be a Q&A button. So you will have the option of posting questions, and we will get them to the moderator and try to include them in the responses during the meeting, and if not, during the Q&A at the end of the session. Good evening, and thank you everyone for joining us. This should be a very fun and interesting discussion. My name is Mark Johnson. I'm the president of Patton Homestead, Inc. nonprofit. Let me briefly introduce you to the Patton Homestead by playing a 45-second video.
Patton Homestead Incorporated is an independent nonprofit dedicated to protecting the historic Patton Homestead in Hamilton, Massachusetts. The homestead, a gift from Joanne Holbrook Patton to the town of Hamilton, was the official home of record for General George S. Patton, Jr., instrumental in ending the Nazi occupation of Europe in World War II, and his son, the highly decorated Korean and Vietnam Army General, George S. Patton IV. Our goal is to support and to assist the town of Hamilton in making the Patton Homestead an attractive and vibrant cultural, educational, and community center for town residents and beyond. Patton Homestead, preserving history, honoring veterans, and welcoming community.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Patton Homestead Incorporated started this series of discussions as a way to engage our community on a wide variety of topics. Our moderator tonight is Anna Ciesnik. She's a Hamilton resident who has a fabulous job as a freelance museum registrar and collections manager. She is perfect for moderating this discussion. We would like to thank Anna and our panelists for making tonight possible. We would also like to thank our underwriters, because we would not be able to pull off this free series without their generous support. And with your indulgence, I am going to play another very short video.
Mellick and Porter, a firm of trial and appellate attorneys that provides superior courtroom representation throughout New England. They are committed to exceeding your expectations. Institution for Savings, building stronger communities together since 1820. Orton's Group, they advise clients with buying, selling, and investing in both residential and commercial real estate. Texture Technologies, TTC helps its customers precisely measure every physical property testing challenge imaginable. Williams Fine Art Dealers, a fine art gallery on Boston's North Shore that represents some of the finest artists working today in the U.S. and abroad. Bank Gloucester is committed to delivering excellent products and services to help improve the financial lives of their clients, as well as giving back to the communities they serve. Start here, get there. 3BC, unlocking the promise of hemp, original creators of U.S. hemp-derived pure cannabinoids, selling business to business.
Okay, so that's the last of our videos. So sorry to keep distracting you. It looks like we have almost everybody signed in. So we have over 70 registrants tonight. So it's very exciting. So there are a lot of people watching us. We want this to be interactive. So once again, use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We'll get the questions to Anna. This is the first in our series of events. The next panel will be on February 24th on looking forward, conservation, and open space on the North Shore. But this is all about art and culture, and we've got some fabulous panelists. So Anna, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's really exciting for me to serve our community in a different capacity. A lot of people don't know that this is actually my profession. So it's really exciting to talk about museum life here on the North Shore, right close to home. So thank you very much to Mark and the Patton Homestead for this opportunity. I'm going to take a moment to introduce our amazing cadre of panelists. We're really lucky to have their expertise from a different range of museums, a smaller museum, a larger museum. Peabody Essex is sort of everything in between and very old, a lot of history. So I'd like to start by introducing our panelists that will be joining with us tonight. First up, we have Derek O'Brien, who's the Chief Marketing Officer for the Peabody Essex Museum. Derek joined PEM in 2016 after serving as the Associate Creative Director for a global marketing agency, Digitas LBI. He brings a deep knowledge of digital marketing, design, and communications to the museum. He leads over the design elements, advertising, editorial, communications, digital media, and photography teams. And in case you can't figure it out, that's probably about 70 people, I'm just going to estimate. With over 15 years of full service advertising experience, O'Brien has a track record of creating award-winning campaigns for Bank of America, Lenovo, Keurig, Reebok, National Grid, and many other organizations. Prior to his professional career, O'Brien studied at UMass Lowell, where he received a BA in Fine Arts. He is also a veteran and who served in the Army National Guard from 1999 to 2008 and was on active duty from 2001 to 2004, which included deployment to Iraq. In recent years, Derek has volunteered with Homebase, a nonprofit dedicated to helping post 9/11 service members, veterans, and their families heal from the invisible wounds of war. He actively serves on the board of directors for Destination Salem as well. So on behalf of everyone involved with Veterans Affairs, especially at a place like the Patton Homestead, thank you, Derek, for your service. I think it's important to recognize.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Next up, we have Kristen Noon. She is the executive director of our very own Wenham Museum right here in town. Kristen oversees all daily museum operations and works in close contact with the board of trustees, staff, and volunteers to provide leadership, vision, and direction for the Wenham Museum. She executes the long-term plans, strategies in accordance with the museum's strategic plan. She represents the Wenham Museums in the community to stakeholders, funders, and manages and oversees all development and grant writing initiatives of the museum. Kristen has a BA from the College of the Holy Cross and a JD from Suffolk, which is a really interesting combination, I'll say, for museum director. She also has a certificate in nonprofit practice from Tufts. She is a Wenham native and lives here with her husband and 2 boys. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you.
And last up, we have Oliver Barker, the director of the Cape Ann Museum. Oliver was appointed director of the Cape Ann Museum in 2019 and has led the museum through a period of tremendous growth. He's responsible for all areas of the museum and oversaw the implementation of the 2019 nationally acclaimed Homer at the Beach, a marine painter's journey. This was a fabulous exhibition. If you didn't get to see it, I think there's a catalog. Maybe Oliver will talk about that. Drawn from 40 public and private collections, this exhibit attracted a record number of visitors and showcased a selection of Homer's finest marine works, many of which were inspired by the artist encounters in and around Cape Ann. Prior to joining Cape Ann, Oliver served as the manager of foundation, government, and international relations for the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. And even though he comes from far away, he has ties to Gloucester and lives in Wenham with his family, but he is an Aussie by birth. He is a cultural management professional with 20 years of experience with global visual arts. And prior to joining the MFA, he worked as the curators and projects director for the Joseph and Annie Albers Foundation. He began his career as the director of education and visitor services at the Guggenheim Collection in Venice, where he lived for nearly a decade. Oh, I didn't know that. Oliver has a master's degree in arts and cultural management from the University of Melbourne and an honors degree in fine arts, painting, and printmaking from the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. So welcome to all of our panelists.
Thank you, Anna.
So before we get started, I just sort of set the table for the audience to listen. This is intended to be really lively and a Q&A. sort of our conversation. So as we're talking about some of our sculpted topics, if something comes to mind you'd like us to answer, please put it in the Q&A. We'll try to come back around to it at the end. We want everyone to feel like you're part of this conversation tonight. So the overall topic is navigating arts and culture in the pandemic. And like every industry, the museum industry has suffered terrible losses, but also some silver linings. And so that's sort of the focus of our conversation. So to get us started, I think I'd like to sort of ask a general question and give everyone a chance to answer. How has the pandemic affected your operations, both sort of an overall industry sense, but especially at each of your institutions? And Kristen, why don't we start with you first up?
Thank you, Anna. So I think as many folks know, Governor Baker did order the closure of many businesses, including cultural organizations, back in March of 2020. So the Wenham Museum closed at that time and remained closed until July 7th, when we reopened to the public under phase 2. So during our closure, like many institutions, we were engaging in virtual programming, tackling some projects inside the institution that we could do while we didn't have visitors, frankly, in the building. But those loss of visitors also really impacted us. In calendar 2020, we served 21,000 fewer people than we did in calendar 2019. So that ultimately really does affect your operating revenues when, like an organization like ours, you do rely on visitors and donors for your ongoing support. So while we did receive a PPP loan and applied for other kinds of relief funding, we did have to make some reductions in our operating budget in order to keep the budget balanced and keep the organization sustainable during that time. So in April, the board and I did reduce our operating budget by half, which also unfortunately did result in the loss of staff. We had some folks on furlough who still are at this time, and we've had some other folks who have decided to retire or have moved on to other positions. So it was really unfortunate to lose a lot of long time, hardworking and dedicated folks in that way. So I would say, the biggest impact really has been on revenue, which has impacted organizational capacity. Since that time, we've reopened, we are serving and welcoming visitors, and we're incredibly grateful to the donors and the members who have really stepped up to support the institution, during this time, understanding that visitation is not going to be a major driver of operational revenue.
I was wondering about the revenue losses. That's been a theme across the industry, so that's hard. Derek, let's go to you. Same sort of question, much bigger scale, bigger institution. Have you had similar problems in terms of gate revenue affecting things, or have you weathered the storm a bit better?
No, absolutely the same situation, just as you mentioned, on a different scale. We reopened in June as well, and I think when we initially reopened, we probably got about 12% of our regular attendance. We started to see a slow creep after that, where we started to get up to about 25%. Being situated in Salem, we actually got a really heavy lift in October. I mean, regardless of the pandemic, people were still coming to Salem in droves, and that actually drove our attendance almost to 70% of what we hit in 2019. But then come November, we hit that crash right back down to 25%. We've basically been hovering there. We're not projecting that we're going to go much higher than that until we start to see vaccines change in tourism trends. So very similar situation. And I think we're seeing it across the industry. I mean, I just was reading articles yesterday about museum layoffs, and I think it's hitting all of us hard. You look at everything that you can possibly do. How can you reduce your exhibition program? What can you do to pull back any kind of budgetary expenses? And unfortunately, we had to do layoffs too. The loss of revenue is it's too big to overcome, unfortunately.
And I think it's good for people to know that affects, small museums like the Wenham Museum, but even a large museum like Peabody Essex that has a lot of resources, a large endowment, a lot of resources. It's not even enough. Last but not least, Oliver, you had to endure the onset of the pandemic right after K-Band Museum really reimagined itself. New wing, new gallery, new everything, new director, kaboom. So
that's right.
The timing was terrible. Can you describe what you've been through over there in Gloucester?
Well, I mean, like Kristen and Derek, it was certainly a challenge in the beginning. We did go through an intense period of reassessment, decided at the board level that we needed to cut our costs by 40%. And at that point, I think certainly when we closed on the 13th of March last year, we did assume that perhaps we might be closed for a short period of time. In terms of our planning, we had it modeled out a 2-month closure versus a 4-month and a 6-month closure. And in actual fact, it ends up that with the reopening of the museum and our 2 campuses in September, we ended up being closed for 6 months. So like PEM and the Wenham Museum, we did see dramatic losses in terms of admissions revenue last year. But we did, I know, Anna, you'd said to speak a little bit about some of the silver linings in the crisis, so that, of course, unfortunately, we did have to furlough staff. And I will say that the silver lining for us is that this, of course, the pandemic, no one could have anticipated, but we had planned to open a brand new 4-acre campus at the entrance to Gloucester last year. And we went ahead with those plans. They were obviously of a different scale, but this is an exciting new campus. It's a place where we hope people will convene around art and ideas. And because of the open space, which has proved to be such an asset during this pandemic, we decided that we could actually open our new campus first safely. And so we had an exhibition there working with the Open Door, a really interesting photography initiative that was showcasing families in the early phases of COVID on their porches. With my Australian accent, it's always a little hard to pronounce, but it was called the Porch Project, or the Portrait Project. And we saw modest numbers who came to see the campus and avail themselves of the great exhibition, but we were delighted to be able to, it's obviously implicit in our mission that we are there for the community and that we are open and accessible. So we were excited to be open again, and fortunately have maintained our opening status through to now, which is great. I think for us, for those of you who haven't visited, the museum on Pleasant Street in downtown Gloucester has quite a number of domestic-sized spaces. And so the real challenge for us in thinking about reopening was, and taking into account Governor Baker's regulations, was that we really wanted to cut back admissions so that people would feel comfortable, and most importantly, our staff would feel comfortable too. And I will say that because of the reduced visitor numbers, it means that anyone on this call, you can come visit us tomorrow. You can have a safe visit. There are not too many people in the galleries with you, and with all the cleaning protocols and occupancy restrictions that are placed on us right now, it's a perfect time to visit a cultural institution. So I hope as a result of our conversations today, you'll feel encouraged to visit the Cape Ann Museum, but of course the PBS Museum and the Wenham Museum too.
Wonderful. Well, that's a good segue to my next question, which sort of defines the word visit, right? So typically museums are all about experiential learning and seeing something in person, and it's about material culture. What can you see, what can you look at? And obviously in the last few years there's been a shift towards digital programming. That was happening anyway, but obviously the pandemic has accelerated that. So I wonder if each one of you can talk about how has the shift towards digital programming as one form of visit affected your work, what you're offering. But I want you to hold your thought about digital, because I'm going to come back to the next definition of visit after that. So maybe just talk about digital offerings and how has that changed because of the pandemic.
I'm happy to jump in there. I will admit that early on we had, as an institution, been relatively analog. And the silver lining again in the crisis was that whilst we had planned to really begin new digital outreach, we had thought that we would do that over an 18-month period, not sort of within a span of 2 months. So we are still working on sort of the perfect model, but one of the first things we did, in addition to some virtual offerings, some art instruction classes and some lectures, we decided to focus on a new newsletter that we send out to anyone who would like to sign up, members and otherwise. It's called CAM Connects, and it's provided a really great opportunity for us to dive in a very deep way into various parts of the CAPAN story. And so we had 18 issues since our closure last year. Now that we're open, we are slowing down the pace of those issues a little bit, and we have 18 programmed again for this current year. But it has been a great way of providing some new content to people around CAPAN and food, or CAPAN and music, areas that perhaps we haven't had a chance to explore in our previous sort of analog world, and it's been wonderful. So it's just the beginning of new digital offerings from the museum.
Kristen or Derek, do either one of you feel like the pandemic has changed plans for digitization of your collections and online access?
I'm not sure if it necessarily changed it as much as accelerated it. As you mentioned, we all knew that we needed to go down this road, but to echo Oliver, we had no idea how long this shutdown was initially going to last. And I just remember early on in the pandemic, even just trying to get the communications out, like, all right, well, we have to cancel in-person programming. Maybe we should close this weekend, to the order coming down from the governor that everything got shut down. We were fortunate that we have a very robust team of creatives on hand, and we immediately made a pivot to make as much of the museum accessible digitally as we could. Like most museum websites, our entire homepage experience used to be around how do you get there? What are your open hours? What's on view right now? So we basically redesigned the entire homepage and launched a PEM from home campaign. We were really focused on what are some activities that people could do from home. We knew that everybody was also trapped in their houses, attached to Zoom, doing remote learning. I have 2 young kids myself. I was going out of my mind trying to find things to occupy them. So we focused on family-friendly programming. What are some things that we can get out? We had a in-person program every Wednesday morning, Pen Pals, that was designed for a young audience. We immediately started video production of that, making that available. We started doing virtual Matterport tours of the galleries. So it's really a virtual 3D walkthrough of all the gallery spaces. We had recently opened a new wing that showcased a lot of our permanent collection, and that wasn't up for very long before the shutdown. So getting in and doing scans of all of those and making that accessible to individuals, that was really the focus early on, and we were fortunate to make that shift. Similar to Oliver, we've kind of scaled back on that now, with our in-person visitation picking back up. And the amount of work that even just went into that, being able to open, the amount of protocols that you have to put in, the extra sanitation, the air sanitization, putting in gallery limits on certain spaces, because again, the building is large enough that we can accommodate the visitation, but some of the galleries get smaller, and really paying attention to how many people can safely be in each gallery at a time. That really took a lot of staff time and effort to make sure that staff is safe, visitors are safe. So that definitely slowed down the volume of online offerings, but I don't see that going away anytime soon. I think the pandemic's really affected how people just interact, not just with cultural institutions, but in general. And it's funny, my wife used to love going to the mall, love shopping. The other day she said to me, I'm never going to the mall again. I'm doing everything online. This is so much easier. So I think that this has really just changed user behavior going forward. So I don't anticipate us really slowing down from the digital anytime soon.
Well, one of the things, and I want to get to Kristen, especially talk about kids programming, but one of the things I'll draw up for the visitors is, when you're describing what it takes to digitize your collection, just to remind folks that the manpower, the human power required to move something in and out of storage, get it displayed, clean it, prepare it, make sure it's not broken, then take a picture, set up the stage. Every single one of those things requires a person to do it. So when you sort of overlay furloughs and lack of revenue with this increased demand to digitize a collection that maybe wasn't ready for that sort of programming, there's a real dynamic tension between, what is your staff able to do and what does the museum need you to do? So Kristen, the Wenham Museum is really focused a lot on, not exclusively on kids programming, but I would say that youth and educational programming are a major part of your audience. So, and a lot of those kids, when the shutdown happened, were out of school, remote learning. There was a lot of pressure about how kids are going to get content. So did you find, particularly as a museum that serves children, as one of your primary audiences? So is that part of your pivot in terms of the digital platform, or not so much?
To some extent, yes. I think when the shutdown first happened, much like what Oliver said, we weren't exactly sure how long this was going to last. So for the first couple of weeks, I think we were in somewhat of a wait and see type of mindset, thinking perhaps we would be reopening in early April. But once it became clear that this was going to go on for a much longer period of time, we began to work to figure out how to offer some of our most popular program series virtually, which would be our preschool programs like Emma's for Museum and Poppet's Playdates, as well as our monthly, brown bag lunch program and other kinds of public programming. So there was just 2 of us on staff at that point. So we had to pivot fairly quickly to figure out which online tool we were going to use to do this. We had to try to acquire some additional, tech and lighting and things like that to try to improve, the production value. So overnight, we joked that we tried to turn one of our galleries into a production studio, and you had, an English major and a Latin major trying to figure out how to do this, and spent a lot of time on YouTube tutorials and reaching out to friends and other museum professionals and our professional associations like NEMA and other organizations that were running webinars and really trying to, I think, support museums and making that shift, which was valuable to us. I think one of the interesting things for us that's happened is that participation in a lot of those programs has remained steady, and it's grown, particularly for our brown bag lunch program, which is a program we do on the second Friday of the month that's targeted towards more our adult audience, folks who are interested in local history and culture. And that participation in some months has been quadruple what it was, in building. So I think some of these programs are accessible to folks who maybe wouldn't have made a trip to a brick and mortar establishment. So now we're thinking, trying to plan ahead for vaccinations and herd immunity. And I think it's possible that a lot of these programs are going to need to be dual channel. We're going to have an in-building experience with sort of a virtual option. I think now that the public, as Derek was saying, is like his wife is accustomed now to shopping online. I think people are going to be accustomed to participating in programs, webinars like this virtually if they wish. So we now are trying to figure out the best way of making that happen to preserve, sound quality, lighting, and all of those things to have a really great experience for the folks that are participating in the building or are choosing to do it at home. And also some of our collections, I think like, our Patton Family Archives and some of our quilt collections and some of our photographic collections also have, interest far beyond the North Shore. So it would really allow people to engage with our collections who aren't able to maybe spend a day driving here for a program, but maybe willing to do that. So I actually think it's an exciting time to be in a museum. I mean, I think a year ago, we wouldn't have maybe thought we would still be doing this at this point, but I think there are a lot of really new avenues for engagement, particularly for smaller institutions that we didn't have a year ago, which are great tools to, build membership, create other kinds of membership programs or ways for the public to become and engaged in a more intimate way with your institution. So we're looking forward to that. We do have some collections that we have been digitizing with grant funding. To your point, Anna, it was really tough to lose a lot of staff, and also for us volunteers. We do have a part-time collections manager on staff, and one of her core functions really is managing a very large group of volunteers that are pretty much our entire collections workforce. And with most of them are retired and they really enjoy coming to the museum, but with the COVID risks associated with older populations, many of them felt, it wasn't appropriate for them to come in at this time, which I totally understand and agree with. And we look forward to the day that everyone can come back. We call them our Monday crew. They mostly come in on Mondays when the museum is closed. And, if you don't make it through the Monday crew, you're not going to make it at the museum. They're a real kind of core part of the institution, and we miss them. And a lot of our work and collections has really slowed down. So it will be great to pick that up again and to get a couple more of our collections out there for the public to enjoy.
All right, you guys ready for a couple spicier questions? Potentially controversial. I'm sure you are. I'm sure the audience is ready. Hold on. It's all related to this. So Derek gave me a great opening. You know, the pandemic, the digitization and experience has opened all these new horizons, people who maybe couldn't visit, wouldn't have you there. But do you think in the act of gaining that audience, do any of you feel as though the magic of that in-person experience is being lost by people who say, well, why should I ever go to a museum again? I can just sit here on my couch and look at it online. Like, are any of you worried that the magic of material culture learning is going to be overshadowed by this increased accessibility?
I'm not at all.
No.
I think at our museum and many museums, so much of why people go is because of the people that they go with. And I think, you know, ultimately these are about, yes, in-person experiences with objects, but also with your friends and with your family. And I think people on the other side of this are going to be looking for that more than anything. And, you know, I think all of our museums will be here for that. And again, I do think there'll be more pressure to have more digital offerings ongoing. But, you know, I think by and large, in a 98-year-old community-based place like the Wenham Museum, you know, people, they want to come and they want to see the trains. You know, our train exhibition is set up behind me. I think, you know, parents and grandparents want to see that look on their child's face when they push that button and they're so happy that the train goes and they're having just a great time, you know, in the museum. And I think it's about togetherness. And I think that at least here at the Wenham Museum, we'll be, you know, like well positioned to fulfill that need when we can all be together again.
Mm-hmm.
So
Derek and I already feel the same. It's not an either or, but an and on the horizon here.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny because when I first went back in to start doing those Matterport scans, I didn't realize how much I took working at the museum for granted. I mean, being there, like it starts to become routine. You're going in every day. You get accustomed to seeing all of that. And then having that taken away for the months that we were shut down, when I went back in, you realize what it means to actually be a fully multi-sensory experience going in, the smells, the sounds, just the experience of being there in person. You can't replicate that in a digital experience. You can do everything you can to get close to it. And I think that, to your point, it's a both and. There's always going to be a reason why somebody can't come to the museum, even when the pandemic's over. Accessibility issues, just not being able to get there, any barriers to entry that you can think of. We can do our best, and we should do our best to provide a digital experience that is as close to possible as what you're going to experience in person. But there's really just no substitution. And I think as soon as you go in and you experience that, you really just can't replicate it.
Yeah, I'd have to agree, and I will say, as an artist at heart, or certainly by training, I'm a firm believer that we exist to be able to provide that real experience as much as possible to our visitors. So, to me, I mean, I think in terms of engagement, what has changed for us as a museum. Quite early on, we engaged a local artist, Stephanie Benenson, and she helped us in creating a wonderful message to honor the frontline heroes who were keeping us safe early on during the pandemic. And we took our 1740 barn, which is at this new campus, the Cape Ann Museum Green Campus, and it's visible from the Rotary and the road as you come off Route 128. And we projected a message just to thank those frontline heroes. In 4 different languages, the languages most spoken in Gloucester, English, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese. And what we did, which I think was innovative at the time and something really quite exciting, is in addition to having that projection that people could enjoy as they were driving home from work, we organized a road rally. Now, I don't think the Cape Ann Museum or many museums would have been associated with road rallies previously, but it was a really wonderful way. This was in May, so very early on, where we were all being so careful in terms of the lockdown. And it was a sort of a no contact, socially distanced gathering where people arrived at a local parking lot, and we drove together and honked our horns as we drove past the display to express our gratitude for all of the frontline heroes. And those kind of innovative engagements, to me, they're just as important as someone stepping into the museum and responding to a beautiful painting or a wonderful ship's model, or having an education experience, which is important. So I think that those experiential opportunities, to me, are really exciting, and to us at the Cape Ann Museum, point us in a very new and different direction.
Fantastic. All right, here's this sort of second part spicy question. So all of these online exhibits that most people are doing have largely been offered to the public for free, which is great, you know, in many ways. But if you actually had a person walking through the door, that would be gate, right? That would be revenue. Is there any movement among any of your institutions to actually start charging for digital access, a la the New York Times, Washington Post? A lot of places charge for content. You're providing this amazing content, but you're not gaining any revenue from it. Is that something on the horizon? Do you think that's something the industry will shift to coming out of the pandemic? You don't have to answer if you think it's going to get you in trouble, but I know that's a question on people's minds.
I will say we're experimenting with it. We're offering a virtual lecture actually tomorrow evening, where we're going to have two of my colleagues are going to speak about developing an exhibition that came out of the pandemic and came out of the digital outreach that we were making. And as a result, we decided to present those works and the things that had inspired us so much in an in-person experience. So we are offering that lecture tomorrow night. It's free for members, and anyone else who'd like to attend, there's a modest fee. We're not convinced that that's the right way to go, but we thought that we would try that, because certainly if we were back in the galleries and this was an in-person gathering, as you say, members would be able to enjoy the lecture for free, and there would be a surcharge for visitors who were not members. So we're taking the opportunity to experiment a little bit, but haven't perhaps found the right balance just yet.
Kristen,
Similar
Derek?
here. Yeah, we haven't started charging for any. We've had conversations about it. I think if we started engaging in programs where we're bringing in artists or somebody that we would want to compensate for their time, bringing them in outside of staff availability, then, you know, we'd probably do a modest fee for something like that. We've done some art nights that we've sent out kits for. Typically there's a small charge for something like that. But as far as the general programming, not sure what it'll be in the future, but as of right now, we haven't started charging for any of that.
We've experimented with it a little bit. Most of our online programming for both our family audience as well as sort of our older audience, generally speaking, has been free. For our brown bag lunch programs, we've requested a suggested donation, and we've had some good success with our adult programming with the suggested donation. I think for the family audience, there's quite frankly so much out there where you have every museum, children's museum, zoo, aquarium, and then other, privately owned for-profit entities like OutSchool and other things like that offering content, that I think the landscape is very crowded. And we have found that when we have tried to charge for a program, not made a requested donation, but an actual charge, that participation or signups have been really quite low. So I think at this moment, we're not really at a place where we can really charge for public programming targeting our family audience. I think there'd have to be some real added value or something very, personal for each person who is signing up to really kind of justify that expense. Maybe once we can return to quote unquote normal life and we can offer, in building programming, maybe some of that will evolve. But I think for right now, our online programs are generally going to be, free or suggested donation or underwritten by a grant or a sponsor or what have you. And then if we are able to do anything in building, probably our usual sort of pricing structure will apply. But with that being said, we mostly have offered all of our programs virtually since last March. Much like the Cape Ann Museum, some of our gallery spaces are quite small, and we are very mindful of not only the state's occupancy requirements, but just what really is realistic in the building. I think if we were actually filling the museum to the state mandated capacity, it would actually seem too crowded because some of our displays, particularly our trains, take up quite a lot of room. So, you know, much like Derek mentioned at the PEM, we spent a lot of time measuring in the month of June to figure out exactly how many people we could really comfortably, you know, put into these spaces so that visitors would feel that it was a safe museum experience. So for the time being, we're just, you know, we're waiting it out, and we're thankful for the folks that have made contributions to participate in programs or, you know, have otherwise funded something for the museum to offer.
Perfect. That's a perfect segue to my next question. We didn't even plan it that way, but in terms of occupancy and space, I think anyone who's ever, you know, traveled to see the Mona Lisa, one might argue that occupancy limits on galleries might be a good thing. Like that might actually be something beneficial because you can't get close to it. And, you know, for people who've had the luxury of being in an almost deserted gallery, it's a very different experience when you have to sort of jockey for position to see something. So that leads me to my next pandemic related question, which is not on your script, but we're sort of moving right through. There's been a sort of a new surgence in outdoor exhibitions, and this has been a great time to be at Sculpture Park, or I've been working on a show for the Clark Art Institute out in Williamstown that's an entirely outdoor sculpture exhibition, which is very COVID friendly because you're outside and you can have your space. So do you feel as though the industry is going to have any sort of ongoing opportunities to look at outdoor programming, or maybe leveraging historic houses or walking tours or things that maybe are not actually in the building? Do you think as we come out of that pandemic, will additional programming take place outside, which is the other form of visit? Visit is a computer. Visit can also mean outside your building. Could each of you talk a little bit about those ideas?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there. I think that as a museum that is solely dedicated to Cape Ann and the very unique role that it has played in terms of influencing both American art and American history, we are very fortunate that we are in that place. And so the museum, certainly prior to the pandemic, had offered to the public a whole range of walking tours. You can come now to the museum and visit our newly refurbished Lane Gallery, and we'll take you on a walking tour to Lane's house, which is just down the street. When you think of artists like Edward Hopper, who made many successive trips to Gloucester in the early 1920s, we have a Hopper walking tour, which was and continues to be very popular. In terms of new programs, something we offered right in the middle of the pandemic in August last year was something called the Cam Culture Cruise. And because we have the place and we also have the harbour, which is, I think, perhaps America's most painted harbour, the Gloucester Harbour, we took the liberty of inviting people to join us on their vessels, and for those who couldn't, to join us via Facebook Live on a 2-hour tour of the Gloucester Harbour to experience the sites that have inspired artists from Hopper and Stuart Davis to obviously Gloucester's own Fitzhenry Lane. And that was perhaps our most highly attended event, in that we had 70 vessels that joined us on the Gloucester Harbour. The harbour master was there making sure that we were all safe. And then we had many people who joined remotely too. And so to me, the outside engagement, it's a great excuse for us to introduce people to the place that is so part of our mission. So I do foresee there's going to be new opportunities for us as a museum to explore that with our visitors.
Derek or Kristen, any thoughts there?
2020 hit hard, that's for sure. We were so excited to roll out this year, really engage with the Salem community, embrace October, embrace the tourism market. And we wanted to, we have multiple historic houses as part of the collection that we really wanted to.
Is it 15 or 21? What's the final number? PEM has a significant number of historic houses.
It's quite a bit. I mean, not all of them are open to the public, unfortunately, but the Andrew Stafford House is the one that we really wanted to focus on for October. You know, everybody's familiar with Hocus Pocus. The home was featured in that film. We wanted to decorate the outside to match that, really give people the opportunity to go get their picture taken. We wanted to do a whole lit jack-o'-lantern display next to the museum. We really wanted to go all out this year. And then, of course, the pandemic hits and just takes that all away. But all of that planning was still done. It was in place, and we're just raring to go once we get the green light, once we know it's safe for everybody to come out and visit. We can't wait to start activating those houses, get people out there. I mean, the best thing that you can do for those houses is get people through them. So we're actively looking at ways to do that.
Kristen, how about you? Do we have a Wenham walking tour in our future?
The museum has done those in years past and hasn't somewhat recently. So we would like to bring back the walking tour. It can be a bit challenging because in some respects, our downtown is actually not that walkable, despite that it's so small. There are some awkward, crosswalks and things, but we would like to do that. And we have almost every year, the last several years, done a tour in Wenham's historic cemetery. There's actually quite an old part of the cemetery with some really interesting headstones. And we've done that, as a virtual program, but would also like to bring that as an in-person program, in addition to perhaps some walking tours. We also do programming in our front yard quite a bit, and with the agreement of the town of Wenham, occasionally we spill over onto the town hall lawn, which is located next door to us. We are actually on quite a small piece of land and have a relatively small front yard, but that hasn't stopped us from doing art activities out there. We are now the keeper of the Art Grows Here program in Hamilton and Wenham, and have acquired that organization and its community art programming. We've done our summer fair outdoors, our fairy festival, every year. So we do wish to proceed with that, depending on what the outdoor gathering sizes will be in 2021. We also, this past fall, underwent a major drainage and preservation project for our historic house. We just have one historic house that's part of our campus here. And that was a CPA funded grant that we received before the pandemic started. And that has done a lot to really move water away from the house. And as a side benefit, our entire front yard has been regraded, which it really did actually need. It was kind of a lumpy and bumpy front yard. So now we're looking forward to putting grass back. I do apologize that our front yard is not very attractive, but we do plan on putting grass and plantings and what have you back there, and also to do some, community stakeholder engagement to see what other things people may like in the museum's yard, like seating and gathering places and things like that, that are compatible with our mission and with the historic district that we operate within in downtown.
Kristen, I'll just add that it looks fantastic. I drive past there every day and I watch them replace the septic system and all those things, but the way you've got the rocks there with the new parking area is beautiful. So
thank you.
If you ever want any tips on hydro seeding, I because of the new campus and the grass that we had to plant at the Cape Ann Museum Green, I'm happy to be a resource there.
I will reach out because we have been debating how we're going to do the lawn, and I also need some hydro seeding at my own house. So, we're hoping we can kind of figure out the best things. So.
We have the team of people who can help. I'll let you know who they are.
I love
That's
it.
great. Thank you.
Connections happening all over the place. I have a couple other questions I'll come back to, but we've got a really good question coming through on the chat that I'd like to indulge. So this is a question from a participant, Paula Borsetti, thank you so much. Talking about how amazing museums are for pivoting back and forth, and as a former teacher, really looking for ways to engage students. So the question to you is, I wonder, how are you going to be able to still engage students, and how we can engage them further in the future? Are there any plans for multi-generational programs for students and seniors working together?
So going back to the silver lining behind all of this, we had an opportunity. It was Salem Prep and the new Liberty Innovation School both needed spaces for their classes to meet due to the pandemic occupancy limits. And we were able to open our doors to invite those classes in. Since then, that's really expanded that relationship. And now we've started training their teachers how to incorporate art materials into the classroom. That's something that never would have happened had this pandemic not hit. One of those schools directly across the street from us, and just seeing those kids being able to come in and have that space available to them has been fantastic. So just the fact that these new relationships have started, these partnerships are going to continue on past this, is very exciting for us.
Kristen or Oliver, any plans for intergenerational programming coming out of this pandemic?
I will share that we have just actually recently appointed a new education manager. So for some months during the pandemic, we were without that position. So we are actually going through a whole reassessment of our educational outreach, and there will be programs that will feature both, will be targeted to both of those groups. So we hope there will be a teen council that will come and provide a new look at our collections. And the museum, Kristen, a little bit like what you were saying at the Wenham Museum, we have benefited greatly in years past from a wonderful docent cohort at the museum. We have almost 60 docents who have supported us. Many of them, of course, during the pandemic, for obvious reasons, haven't come back. But I was heartened in joining a call with them recently that the ones that have been back have been lobbying and have been saying it's safer than being in your own home. So yes, it's a moment of reassessment for us, but certainly as we ramp up and towards the summer, there will be new programs offered by the museum.
So at the Wenham Museum, we, for many, many years, have run programs on colonial life in America centered on our historic house. And unfortunately, with the occupancy requirements that we're currently operating under, we haven't been able to do that in an in-person way. We are piloting with a homeschool group and with another classroom, trying to do sort of a combination of some virtual offerings with maybe some activities the students are either going to do at home or on their in-person school day, but it's been very tricky. At the moment, we don't have an educator on staff, so having the capacity to really do that well is important. So that's a function that we will be looking to restore as we move into our next fiscal year. I mean, typically we served almost 4,000 schools, school children a year on these field trips. So we're hoping that next year, if we're back to a more traditional school year, we'll be able to bring those field trips back. In terms of multi-generational programming, serving a multi-generational audience is part of the Wenham Museum's mission statement, and connecting generations is a core value. So we've always done a lot here really to bring generations together. One way of doing that is really by having objects that we hope that parents or grandparents will prompt a memory or a story or something that they can share with a member of the younger generation. A great example of that is in one of our most recent exhibitions on the Wenham Lake ice harvesting trade, we had ice boxes. And there were plenty of grandparents that would say, oh, my mother had one of those, my grandmother had one of those, and we remember the Iceman coming, and you have this whole kind of intergenerational sharing that occurs as prompted by an object, which is something we really strive for when we think about exhibitions. We've also done other programs that specifically try to foster a multi-generational experience. A recent one that comes to mind is that we had Tasha Tudor's grandson here, as well as Grandma Moses's great-grandson here for a program called Grandmother and Me. And Tasha Tudor's grandson had, created a cookbook. So he was here for a book signing and a recipe making activity. And Will Moses was here to talk about, his experiences growing up with his grandmother and his life as a painter. And he did a mural and some art activity with families in the museum. So we have a history of doing that kind of public programming, and we'll just, plan to continue it. I think kind of going back to normal when we're able to ramp back up a bit more heading into next year.
I'll share that both in the collection manager world and also when I worked at the Museum of History and Industry in Seattle, there was always a fun activity called What Is It? When you have something that you truly can identify. And it's actually a great way to bring in something that a 7-year-old today has no idea, but their grandparent might, and to have that storytelling. But if you frame it as this mystery, find the strangest looking thing you can and use that. There's a great sort of storytelling. So I strongly encourage the use of the what is it as a technique.
We do it every Wednesday on social media. We have
What's It Wednesday. You go.
So maybe the little kids aren't on Facebook yet, but there are some really interesting objects that we put up that are a little bit surprising from our very large collection. So
yeah, we'll take a couple more questions from the audience and then we'll wrap up with a couple more. So this is a good question from Scott Harrison, budding archaeologist. Were there any interesting finds during the drainage work at the Wenham Museum? What did you find in your yard?
So we actually did not find anything. And I think that's largely due in part to the fact that the building was renovated and expanded in the late 90s. So in about 1996, 97, there was a major fundraising campaign to enlarge the facility, and the site was very disrupted at that point in time. So there weren't any major discoveries. We did have that conversation with the crew, and kept appropriate folks notified at the state level and what have you that we were doing this work. But unfortunately, we did not find anything exciting.
Bummer. Okay, a couple other future leading questions. This is a question coming from Peter Quinn, talking about donor maintenance. So how are you going to maintain development of new donors and major donors that are focused on fundraising coming out of the pandemic, not necessarily focused on present offerings, but just trying to navigate to the end and keep the museums alive? Has there been a shift in donor relations as a result of the pandemic?
I will say that at the museum, we've been very fortunate that our members and our donors, we've just, our fiscal year is the calendar year, so we've just ended that year. And people really did understand that this was a year of need, and we're most grateful for that. And many people were very incredibly generous with the institution. In terms of donor relations, I think that one thing that we have been able to continue to do is engage our members and our donors in real and authentic ways. So there, whilst with the opening of our new campus, we weren't able to have a large community celebration, we did try and use that facility and the fact that most of it is outdoors to bring our members and our donors to come see it and have very personalized experience in visiting the site. So, I just want to express my thanks to anyone on this call who is already a donor, or if you've supported us or any other cultural institution. It's so appreciated, because 2020 was a year of need. 2021 for us remains the same. Whilst I'm very positive for the future for the Cape Ann Museum and for cultural institutions in general, there is a real need for individual support and institutional support too. So for anyone who is of that mind, thank you. It's much appreciated.
I think I remember reading someplace that there were fears that something like half of the small museums in the country would not survive the pandemic, would shut their doors forever and never return. So it's one of those questions of if we want any of these museums to be here in 2022, we have to get them through, and that real people like the three of you work in museums. So Kristen, Derek, any change in donor relations, or sort of similar to where Oliver is, just grateful for every dollar?
Oh, same boat. We're about halfway through our fiscal right now, and our donors, our members have come up huge for us this past year. As we mentioned earlier on in the call, the loss of revenue was staggering. So thankfully, our donors really came through for us. And if it wasn't for that support, we'd be in a much more dire situation. So yes, thank you. And as far as trying to balance the programming, that's something that we're still having conversations around. It's really trying to balance the limited staff resources that we have, still have that exclusive interaction with some of the curators on staff, some of the senior staff with the high-level donors, and how do we balance both? It's like, okay, well, do we do a virtual tour and then we put that live for a group in advance and then it becomes available to the general public after? We're still going through all those conversations, and how are we going to do that? How do you promote a membership where before, membership had perks that went with it, free admission, advance tickets to certain programs. And now that everybody's in the same boat, where do those membership benefits fall in? So we're still trying to do that, make sure that we still have those offerings for those closest to us, and still meet the needs of the general public as well. So work in progress.
Kristen, do you want to add something?
I would agree. We've had the highest grossing annual fund we've ever had this fiscal year. We're on a June 30th fiscal year. I think people are being reminded of what's important. I think they feel as though our organizations and their survival, are important. And I think their understanding of the fact that the offerings are going to be different right now, or the museum experience might be slightly different right now. We've had phenomenal visitor feedback from the in-gallery experience. I've been really aggressively surveying the folks that have been coming for their feedback, and have really been using that to communicate with donors to say, you know, this is what folks are saying. This is important right now. We need to keep this going. We need your help. Membership is a challenge. We typically do have a very large membership base. Membership revenue, interestingly, hasn't fallen off to the degree that visitation has, which I think really is a testament to the fact that our members, much like our donors, want us to be here for them on the other side and to have a museum experience for them. And we've really been reaching out to members to really just encourage them to continue their membership, even if they're not ready to visit, so that we can survive this. So we're doing all of that. And I would say spending more time, you know, on the phone. Never been on the phone probably so much as I have the last several months, and just regular phone, not even necessarily Zoom, just trying to connect with people and thank them and ask for their support and let them know what's happening. And we have had some of our donor base really step up for the Wenham Museum, which has been really great to see. So we just have to, I think, keep this going until we can reach a point where hopefully visitation revenue starts to decrease the pressure on philanthropy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, switching gears a little. Does everybody have their curator hat on? You ready? I know that at PEM they have a curator of the present time. My friend Trevor is a curator of the present time. So thinking as a curator, and with the idea that museums are sort of the collective memory of society, right? When you look back on things that happened, it's often because there's an artifact or a document that a museum has saved. A picture, something physical, a homestead, you know, the entire Patton homestead was it. So I want each of you to think about your museums and think about the pandemic. And if we were going to look back 100 years from now at this terrible time, what kinds of things do you think museums will have in their collections to memorialize this terrible pandemic? Give you a second to think on it. Let's see, who should we go first? I'm going to pick on Oliver because I know he has a curatorial mind. He's the former curator. What is Cape Ann Museum going to have with this pandemic in its collection?
Well, I will say it's a really interesting question, because early on in the pandemic, as we were thinking about how we were going to handle and program the museum during the crisis, we actually looked back. The museum's been around for 145 years, and whilst our collections feature the almost 400-year history since English settlement on Cape Ann, we do have a very important and interesting Indigenous collection as well at the museum, and very focused on making sure that we tell the complete narrative of everyone who's lived on Cape Ann. That said, we looked back to 1918 and the pandemic of the Spanish flu, and very fortunately, because we have a wonderful and very rich archive, we were able to produce some images, some fascinating photographs of the Addison Gilbert Hospital in Gloucester that showed how they had set up tents in the field outside the hospital in order to treat patients then. And so that pointed us to the fact, of course, that it was wonderful to be able to look and see that we had those resources, but it did make us think, well, what should we be collecting now to actually showcase? Well, let's hope that in 100 years' time, we're not all in the same situation, but if we are, hopefully we'll have materials that are the people that follow us can utilize. So the portrait initiative that I mentioned, those photographs showing people on their porches during the early phase of the pandemic is really important. And some of the other materials that were shared at that time, we've been trying to collect a lot of stories from people during the pandemic. Very shortly, we will be in early March acknowledging those people who have unfortunately lost their lives, and we have a number of art projects and memorials that we're working on to honor those people. So it's those kind of objects that I think will define our collection 100 years from now.
Derek, Kristen, what are we going to see in your collections?
So we actually made a pretty strong effort early on to try to document as much of this as possible. Similarly, what Oliver was saying, we had our photographers go out and really try to start getting photo documentation. we were fortunate where we had a drone photographer volunteer some of his time and getting some of the aerial shots of the empty streets, the beaches with nobody on them. We went around to local businesses and even just seeing the ingenuity of some of those businesses and what they did to, if anybody had been to the restaurant Ledger in Salem, the pivot they made to Ledger Basket, where they were selling goods that you couldn't get at grocery stores, and getting one of those menus, getting the signs of the businesses that were closed, masks that, just trying to document the rapid change in lifestyle that we all went through. So we would have a comprehensive record of really what was happening to the community during that time.
Sort of waiting to see what museum is the first one to do a mask exhibit. What is it going to look like, and how will it be done tastefully without being, too soon? Kristen, what about you? Local thoughts about, because your mission is a little bit more specific than the other two museums. So how do you see that manifesting here?
Right. So our collections committee has actually been, discussing the kinds of things that we would like to add to our collection to document this time. I think obviously archival resources like photography and things like that come to mind. Textiles like the masks and other things. We're also interested in trying to capture, children's perspectives on this time, because we do so much to serve, children and families. So we're working to explore the best way of doing that, as well as maybe capture some, first person accounts from people who were involved in the pandemic response in our community, like folks in town hall from public health and the town clerk. Our institution was founded in 1922, so we do not have the 1918 sort of history to look back on to see what our own institution's precedent may be, but we do have a great volume that the institution wrote in the late 40s called Wenham and World War II, that actually chronicles the lives of all of the people who lost their life in World War II in active duty and service, what have you, as well as the home front experience and experience of, civil defense and other things like that in the community. So that volume, I know, has been an internal reference for us to kind of think about the different areas where we could, perhaps capture both stories and objects that support them.
Sort of the ephemera. Okay, so sort of looking ahead, because I'm mindful of the time and I want to make sure if other people have questions to pop them in the chat before we run out. So this is sort of a question from one of our visitors in the chat, and sort of a question that was on our horizon. So looking beyond the pandemic, what sort of new avenues do you imagine opening up in the next couple of years? What are the things that you're going to use to pull out of this pandemic looking forward? Can you give us a little bit of a preview of 2021, 2022, and what it's going to look like moving forward?
So we're definitely focusing on a couple of initiatives that we're really excited about, and one that was really a direct result of the pandemic and a response to it. Our programming team has really started to focus on a wellness initiative. That's going to be a series of programs that's really just focused on ways to, what's the best way to put this? The programs are really designed to improve physical, emotional, spiritual well-being. So anything as far as yoga in the galleries, we're trying to do a create night where, as you can imagine, people are extremely lonely at times right now, cut off, isolated. So what are some ways that we can really overcome that? So we're going to do an art night where we send the supplies to everybody, and everybody can gather and do one of these activities through Zoom. There's a beautiful exhibition in our gallery right now, Breath, from an artist, Zara Hussein, and she had to have surgery to help with a breathing issue that she had that left her basically learning how to, it forced her to learn how to breathe all over again. And if you look at what this pandemic has done, you think of what was going on with George Floyd, and breath, something that you just take for granted, that you're just so used to, until you can't do it. And that sense of panic that comes along with that. She really did a series of paintings that focuses on the inhale and exhale, and to draw our attention to the importance of breath, not only to recognize those that have suffered a loss from not being able to breathe, but the healing ability of breath and what that can do for us. And just looking at everything that 2020 has thrown at us, not just the pandemic, but the issues of racism, inequality, climate change, all of it. And it really made us think, like, what's the role of a museum right now going through all of this? And how can we create programs and experiences that really speak to what the public is going through during these times? So I really think that's going to be something that we're going to focus on heavily moving forward. And this year has been quite an eye-opener as far as that goes.
Yeah, I think the content coming out of it on all of those fronts is going to be tremendous. And I'm not sure that museums will really realize what it means. You know, it takes a while for the sort of the important things to shake out, right? You have to sort of look and see what comes from it. So, Kristen, what do we have looking forward in the 21 moving ahead in Wenham?
Well, I think before we proceed too much farther with our 2021 planning, we're going to engage in another round of surveying. We have opted into participating into a national survey run by the American Alliance of Museums and Susie Wilkening Consulting. That's going to be, each organization that's participating, I think it's about 300 museums, are sending out the same survey to gather feedback from their constituency on their thoughts and feelings on virtual programming, their return to in-person museum visits, vaccination, all of that, and will give us some insight into not only our audience, but also benchmarking it against the region and the country. So we really here have always tried to be responsive to the needs of our immediate community and would really like to kind of, take the pulse of that community right now to see what it is that they would like as we move forward. I think generally speaking, the plan is to continue to move forward with some of the core initiatives that we had started before the pandemic, obviously continuing our beloved, family programming. We had a new line of offerings moving out with equestrian history and culture. We're in the process of acquiring the Patton Family Archives, and there is additional programming and potential there. We would like to, continue to doing all that, but make the calibrations necessary that we need to, depending on how COVID has changed our community and our world. Also, we are going to be 100 next year. So I think we're thinking that, 2020 would have been more of a getting organized for our anniversary year than a responding to an international global disaster, type of year. So we have had to rethink some of those plans and adjust some timelines, but would like to really have a special retrospective exhibit, some special events, and some other things to really celebrate the 100th, in addition to, of course, raising some capacity to help launch the institution into its next really century of existence. And I think, COVID maybe has delayed some of those ideas or some of those plans, but I don't really think they'll be deferred. So that would really be our plan here. But first, we will put in a lawn and get some, fun programming happening back at the museum. So.
Okay, last question. So I'm giving you warning that after this, we'll pass it back. So this is your last opportunity to shamelessly pitch whatever you want the public to know about your museums. But this question, I think, is really heartfelt from those of us who love museums, who love art and culture and history and care about community. What can we do other than donate? What can the public do to support your museums, both in terms of resources, time, volunteerism? If you could ask anything of the public to keep you going, what's your wish list from us? How can we help you? And is there anything just that you want us to know? Final thoughts for the night. Let's see, Derek, I'll let you go first this time because you're deep in thought. I'll interrupt you.
Well, it's funny because we were right in the middle of a strategic planning exercise when all of this happened. And similar to what Kristen was just saying, we were really focusing on interviewing community members to really just flip that question around. We were asking, what can we do as a museum to better serve the community? So it's funny, I really haven't put much thought into it the other way around as to what the public can do for us. This is, as I mentioned during the last question, it's really been an eye-opener of a year, and trying to figure out what the museum's role in the community is. And honestly, we're still getting responses in from surveys that we sent out on what we can do to be a better community partner. And one of the instances coming out of that is a bilingual initiative that we're looking at. 20%, well, approximately 20% of Salem's residents identify as Spanish speaking, yet none of our labels were in Spanish. None of our marketing materials were in Spanish. And when we put out a COVID questionnaire when the public was coming in, as far as, oh, have you been exposed? Have you felt sick? We did it bilingual. The amount of feedback that we got from that, from people just saying, wow, thank you for doing that. And just having something in my native language when I came in, again, massive eye opener. So we're really taking a focus now on trying to be bilingual. It's going to be a slow, steady rollout. But we just want to be mindful of all of that. And honestly, it's just funny that you mention it, because we've been looking at it the exact opposite way. And what can we do as cultural institutions to better serve the community?
Well, I think that recognition of being accessible, it doesn't matter if the label is readable to your majority, if you're missing your population. Also, just that it's hard enough to turn museum language into credible English for those of us who are native English speakers. There's a whole other language, so making it bilingual is like an extra hurdle. So
absolutely, just trying to translate museum speak to, yeah, I mean, and then put another language on top of it.
I'm not even sure museum is a language on itself. So to actually add on an additional layer of true cultural language. So, all right, Oliver, what could we do to help support Cape Ann Museum so you're here for another 100 years?
We invite you to participate. We want you to visit, and if that is a virtual visit or an in-person visit, we want you to feel welcome. We want you to be part of our programs and be part of our community. So that's my ask to you. Please do come see us. However that may transpire, as I say, virtually or otherwise. We want people to celebrate this great place that we live in. It's a privilege that we have, and we would be excited to see you at both of our campuses.
Kristen?
I would agree. We would love for people to come visit, whether that's in person or through the web or through a virtual program. And then I would say within, the Hamilton and Wenham community and the broader North Shore, which is really our sort of core geographic service area, I would just really encourage people to think of us. If they're thinking, wow, we wish there was XYZ in our community, or we wish we had this event, or we wish we had this thing to do, I would really encourage folks to reach out to the museum to see if there's a way that we could, partner or collaborate on those types of initiatives. We're a small team, which means we are a flexible team. And, many of us and our board members, live and work here in this community and really want to be here as a resource and to help everybody. So we would say, just get in touch, reach out. I live in town. I'm around, so please, we'd love to hear from you and to just know the best way that we can all work together.
I think Oliver nailed it. It's a community. I mean, I hear it all the time, like, oh, I'm not a museum person. Trust me, you're a museum person. If you come to any one of our establishments, I guarantee you will find something in there that you relate to or you identify with. Yeah, just come visit.
Well, and I think on that note, I think museums are changing a lot. And I think this panel is a great representation. We've touched on cultural relevance, cultural sensitivity to our communities, beautiful spaces indoors and out. I think that people used to think of the museum industry as very, very exclusive and very inaccessible. But all three of your museums, including the Patton Homestead right here, are very accessible, open places that are mindful of their community. So I sort of echo that from my seat as the moderator and as a long-time, lifelong museum person. Museums are great interactive spaces, and they're living, breathing institutions. And the best thing about being in places where people who like art is they're gorgeous. They're beautiful buildings. If you haven't been to the wings of, PEM and the new Cape Ann Museum and looking at these spaces, they're gorgeous, and just really encourage people to explore them fully when we can get back in person. So I want to say thank you to our three panelists for your time and your expertise. I think it was really informative. Thank you to our audience members for your really insightful questions. And I'm very appreciative of this chance to have sort of brought everyone together. So with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Mark, our host, for some final words.
I am just astonished at how really deep and rich this conversation was. I don't know what I had really planned it to be, but hearing you all sort of describe your world, to understand the ingenuity that each of you have had to pivot in your own way to address changes in your own markets, and still looking at it with full opportunities. I mean, if you, none of my notes talk about anybody back on their heels. It's all about what are we doing for our community, and how can people engage us, and what can we do, and the passion by which Oliver describes honoring the heroes that are sort of getting us all through this is just really lovely to hear. And I don't know what I expected, but this was much more rich than I was. So to the extent people can visit your institutions, become members, donate, please, it's going to be a beautiful cold week next week. Go out and visit their organizations now, right away. Kick off their 2021 campaigns. Thank you, everybody. So Patton Homestead's next event is going to be next February on the 24th on looking forward for open space and conservation on the North Shore. We'll have trustees of reservations and Essex County Greenbelt involved. There may be another member as well. It should be a very rich conversation. I'm very interested in where that's going to go. Following that, in the end of March, we're going to have a Patton 101, the importance of the Patton family to the North Shore. That has art elements, it has history elements, it touches on many different things. It's sort of one of the reasons Wenham Museum is so excited about Patton Family Archives, is because it touches everything about our community. And so that's what we're all about. I understood from the questions and answers that the sponsor ad got played in a funny way, or the underwriter montage. So I am going to play that one more time and call that out. But I really just want to say, thanks to each of you for participating. Thank you to the audience. And we still have a phenomenal percentage of the people that signed up. And here it is almost an hour and a half later. So they're either bored and leaving it on, or more likely they are absolutely fascinated based on the types of questions and the comments that are showing up in the Q&A.
Well, now they know how cool museum people are. We're really very interesting.
Yeah, and the craziest thing can inspire people, right? I bet nobody looked and watched the inauguration and expected to be moved by a poet, right? I mean, that wasn't on anybody's bingo card. Likewise, walking through the Cape Ann Museum, every floor you can be astonished at something else. Just visually, you just can't contain things in the Peabody Essex, and in the Wenham Museum. Likewise, it's like, oh, I remember something like that. This flag's a story here. I remember an icebox just like, I mean, it really is phenomenal. That said, allow me to say thank you. Allow me to play our underwriter montage, because we are very grateful for them. So let me just do that right now.
Mellick & Porter, a firm of trial and appellate attorneys that provides superior courtroom representation throughout New England. They are committed to exceeding your expectations. Institution for Savings, building stronger communities together since 1820. Orton's Group, they advise clients with buying, selling, and investing in both residential and commercial real estate. Texture Technologies, TTC helps its customers precisely measure every physical property testing challenge imaginable. Williams Fine Art Dealers, a fine art gallery on Boston's North Shore that represents some of the finest artists working today in the US and abroad. Bank Gloucester is committed to delivering excellent products and services to help improve the financial lives of their clients, as well as giving back to the communities they serve. Start here, get there. 3VC, unlocking the promise of hemp, original creators of US hemp-derived pure cannabinoids, selling business to business.
Okay, hopefully that played with good sound quality and everybody appreciated it. But thank you very much. Anything further to add? Otherwise, thank you, and we'll end this webinar right now. Okay, have a great evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks
everyone.
everybody.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.